Hello my lovely cootie crew and welcome back to my channel. Today is going to be a summary of my ear stretching journey all the way from the beginning up until a 00 gauge. If you are new to my channel, I started stretching my ears 2.5 years ago. Currently I'm at 11 millimeters or 7/16, which is one size up from a 00. My initial goal size was a 00 gauge, but once I got there, I decided to go a little bit bigger. If you haven't seen it already, I do have a playlist for my ear stretching journey with all of my stretches, but for this video, I'm just going to make it a summary video. So mostly all I'm going to be showing is each stretch along the way with a really brief summary of that stretching period. If you want more in-depth information on any of the stretches or the stretching periods, or the journey itself to get a better understanding of how it was along the way, visit my channel. I have a whole playlist on there for ear stretching. Along the way, I tried pretty much everything from tapers to taping to dead stretching. All right, without further ado, let's hop right in and get started from the beginning. First, I want to go over the steps I took before each stretch. Again, I go into more depth in the actual videos, but before each stretch, I would soak my lobes in some warm, not hot, just warm water. This just gets some extra blood flow to the ears, makes the skin a little bit more pliable. I would soak it for about 3 minutes on each side. Then really quick massage those lobes, again, just to get some blood flow and make them pliable. And then use coconut oil or stretching balm on my lobes, tapers, and jewelry. Consistent aftercare routine basically just consisted of warm sea salt soaks. You can find different recipes online for different sizes, batch sizes, and I would just use a sea salt soak for about 5 to 7 minutes a day with some warm water. Here we go. This is what my ears looked like before I started stretching them. Oh, look at those little baby lobes. Here we go. All right, so my very first stretch was from 18 gauge to 14 gauge. I skipped right over a 16 because the kit that I inherited was a 14 gauge starting size. So that's what I used. I had no idea what stretching would feel like in my ears. So that was kind of crazy to finally just kind of dive into it. As you can see here, it's taking me a while to get that first taper in. The first time I wasn't sure how hard was okay to be adding pressure or anything, and the first ear took about 20 seconds to stretch. In the second ear, I just used more consistent pressure and it took about 5 seconds. In hindsight, this stretch actually I remember feeling the most. So most of the stretches after this are completely painless, but after this my ears felt tight for like a day, but no bleeding, no pain, and it was done. So during the first 3 weeks of having a 14 gauge size, I lost all of the plugs that I had and then all of the tapers. So I ended up impromptu stretching to a 12 gauge, which is why I don't have it on video, but I did videotape me changing out the jewelry, which, you know, was more than nothing. And during this time is when I started using the steel tunnels and tapers. The stretch to a 10 gauge was super duper boring, so here's just a video of me stretching my lobes. I waited about 9 weeks before stretching to an 8 gauge from the 10 gauge size. The whole period was super chill, no issues, and there were also no issues while stretching, so it was a pretty standard stretch. Super smooth, super painless, straight up felt like nothing happened. Yeah, it was just that easy. Okay, so now stretching to a 6 gauge was a lot more of a pain. As you can see, the size jump was bigger than it has been up to this point, and I had some issues getting to a 6 gauge. Overall, it took 4 months and a few steps to get there. So right now we're watching my first try at getting to a 6 gauge from an 8 gauge after 8 weeks. It did not stretch. As you can see here, it just kind of stopped along the taper, and I added a little bit of pressure, and since it wasn't moving, I decided my ears were not ready to stretch, and I took it out and waited a little bit longer. Okay, so now I'm stretching to a 6 gauge for the second attempt, and this attempt is successful. I stretched to a 6 gauge without any pain and just a little bit of pressure on the taper. However, when I went to go put the jewelry in, the jewelry would not fit, and I fiddled with it for a couple minutes and ended up getting my ear very angry that I couldn't get that plug in. Found out afterwards that it was larger than a 6 gauge, which is why it wouldn't fit into my ear. So, since my ear was upset, I dropped back down to an 8 gauge for a week to make sure nothing was going on. My ear was totally fine. So then I started the taping method after that for an entire month, and I went into more depth on the taping method in the next video. So after taping for a month, here we are for the third and final stretch to really get to a 6 gauge. The stretch was really chill and super painless, again because I had been taping, so it wasn't that big of a jump to the full 6 gauge size. But man, what a roller coaster the stretching period was. I've seen on the internet that 8 gauge to 6 gauge is a pain for a lot of people, and that was definitely true for me. But yeah, there we go. That was the super easy stretch. Finally. After using the taping method to successfully get to a 6 gauge, I used it again to get to a 4 gauge. So I went more in depth on the process of how I was using the taping method, which included cleaning everything to make sure everything was clean. I used PTFE tape, some people use bondage tape, and then wrapped it super tight around my glass plugs. What I was doing was adding about 2 rolls a week, because after a week is when it started to feel loose, so I would add a little bit more tape. This was a very tedious process and just took forever and involved a lot of cleaning. Now that I've learned a little bit more about my ears, I think the tape was actually irritating my skin because I had to moisturize it a ton when I was using the tape. But overall, it didn't really damage my ears and helped make the stretch really smooth. Now to get up to a 2 gauge size, I use more of a dead stretching method for most of this time period. Here we can see me stretching up to a full 2 gauge or 6mm size, but previous to this, I had gone from a 4 gauge, which was 5mm, to a 5.3mm glass plug, waited a while, and then switched to a 5.8mm glass plug, which was just shy of a 2 gauge size. Stayed at that for a little bit, and then finally to get to a full 2 gauge, I used the tape. Overall, it was a 3-month time period from the 4 gauge to the full 2 gauge size, and again, that was a couple different steps and mostly dead stretching to get to this point. I was just using the tapers for that last 0.2mm so that I could get my new plugs and tunnels in. So it was super smooth and very easy. Now to stretch to a 0 gauge size, I again decided to use a couple different steps to get there instead of one big stretch. Here are a 2, 1, and 0 gauge taper. I ordered a steel 1-gauge taper and tunnel set online so that I could stretch from a 2 to a 1. This was my first attempt at stretching from a 2 to a 1 gauge. After 6 weeks at a 2-gauge size, I was finally able to stretch up to a 1 gauge with no issues. However, once I had that tunnel in, the metal was not great quality and actually made my ears itch, which in hindsight, I definitely should not have kept that in, but I did before I stretched up to a 0. I taped a little bit from a 1 gauge to a 0 gauge, not all the way, but the total time from getting to a 2 to a 0 was 3 months, and we can see here that the stretch to a 0 gauge was really smooth and quick, which is what we want. Instead of jumping straight to a double 0 gauge size, because that is a pretty big size jump, I decided to get a 9mm glass plug and just do dead stretching to a 9mm size. I didn't even bother with tapers or metal jewelry. I just got a glass plug since I knew my ears were not irritated by glass, and used that instead of a taper or anything, and it was totally smooth and totally fine. It was at this size that I was consulting a professional piercer as to why my ears were so upset, and they informed me that my ears were most likely getting irritated by the metal jewelry, and they informed me to stick to glass and stone to get my ears back to happy. So here's a clip of what my ears looked like, and you can tell something was up, but they got so much better. So now it was time to stretch up to a double 0, and it was only a half jump since I had gone to 9mm instead of 8 to 10mm. There we go, super easy. So I was finally at a double 0 gauge, which was my initial goal size for a super long time. It was very exciting. After finally getting to this size, I vowed to give my ears a ton of TLC. So again, I was only using glass and stone plugs after learning that the metals was irritating my ears, but I also got a stretching balm and stopped using coconut oil and was only using stretching balm to lubricate my ears. I also did vitamin E oil massages very consistently for a couple minutes a day, and my ears were in tip-top shape after about 3 months. That was it. After about 2 years of stretching my ears, I was finally at a double 0 gauge. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I'm still stretching my ears. I'm not really sure when I'm going to finally stop stretching them, but that's okay for now. And of course, this wouldn't be an ear stretching video on my channel if I didn't go ahead and say, everybody is different. And really all you have to do is make sure you're listening to your ears. If they don't want to stretch, back off, give them time, be patient. Being patient and taking your time is going to make your ears so much happier in the long run. And I'm really happy that I took the time to be patient and find out what was and was not working for my ears. Thank you everyone for watching. You guys are seriously the best. This community on here has been so helpful and so encouraging, and I really, really appreciate all of you guys. And as always, please go ahead and share your own experiences, feedback and tips down in the comment section. So don't be afraid to ask questions if you're new to ear stretching or just kind of investigating. And if you're experienced in ear stretching, please go ahead and share your experience with us. You guys have been really awesome following along on this whole ear stretching journey and providing me and everyone watching by sharing a ton of experiences, tips, things that you guys learned along the way, encouragement. It has been super freaking awesome. If that was useful, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Check out the other videos that I have on my channel and subscribe if you want to stay tuned for the future of my ear stretching journey. Oh, and a quick update for anyone who watched my video about the sternum piercing. It is doing so much better. Yay. I'll see you all next Tuesday.